Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we have a review of a game called OTYS, I believe is how it's pronounced. This is a 2 to 4 player action selection, mostly game, with a lot of puzzle solving going on for sure. The theme here is that you are divers in the future, picking up scrap from a planet that's been completely flooded. You're basically, it boils down to getting resources, trading those resources in, and fulfilling contracts.
Waterworld, the board game.
Yeah, a little Waterworldy. It sounds very simple. You're collecting resources, but there is a lot of pieces and parts moving in between.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of programming, which we haven't said yet, in this game, in which you're going to be moving these divers and getting them timed exactly right to be able to do actions in very specific spots. We're going to talk about the components, but before we do, this is a 2 to 4 player game, and it takes about an hour, is what it says on the box. Our experience is a little bit longer than an hour.
For sure, a little bit longer.
That's because you're going to be trying to fulfill contracts. These contracts will give you prestige points. Each of them are worth a different amount. And the first player to get to 18 points will signify the end of the game.
Right.
So let's talk about what you're actually trying to do here. As we said, each player has a player board in front of them with a bunch of divers. These divers allow you to do very unique abilities depending upon where they are on your player board.
Yeah, everyone's going to get the same set of divers, and there's, 8 of them, and you're going to randomly put those out in a stack in this diver section of the board, as randomly as you possibly can, and that's going to come into play significantly because you're going to be rearranging these guys constantly.
Yeah, and then you're going to put keys next to the slots. Now, this is a die-cut board, so there's areas that these can slide around in, and with your different keys that can move. These are going to be put in numerical order from 1 to 5 with an X key at the top. We'll explain what all these do in a moment. Each player is also going to take one of the 4 different types of resources in the game and randomly put these on the bottom 4 sections. Now, it's kind of hard to see on the camera here, but there's outlines here of 5 different areas that correspond with these lines, or rows that you see on your player board. You're going to be filling up these areas with resources. And the trick here is that the top ones can only hold a minimum amount of 3, while the bottom ones can hold 6.
Right.
So you're trying to put them in the right slot to be able to fulfill contracts at the right time.
Yeah, everything is done to a very specific guideline in this. When you take a resource, it goes into a certain space.
Yeah.
When you fulfill a contract, it has effects in certain places.
You also are going to start with 1 battery. This battery allows you to manipulate your divers and to make them not have to surface after you take actions. We'll get into that in a moment. 3 credits. There's a whole stack of credits, but these credits will allow you to use specific divers and to use sponsors on your turn. Some of them require you to spend money for those divers or to pay them off to be able to do actions for you.
Exactly. And the last thing you have on your player board are your technicians.
Yeah.
You have a mechanic here along the side and a hacker down at the bottom. I'll go ahead and tell you what these things do. The mechanic is going to affect one of the abilities when you're going to be sort of rearranging your divers. You can move a diver up or down using a battery depending on where your mechanic is. You can move them 1, 2, 3, or 4 spaces. The hacker, this is kind of an interesting mechanic because as you use your key tokens, they come down here to the bottom of your board. As soon as the key tokens that you've used touch the hacker tile, they all get refreshed and you get them back. You're going to be able to move both the hacker and the mechanic on their scales so that it makes them a little bit more powerful.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of flexibility from being able to manipulate those through the course of the game. As we said, there's contracts. There's 3 contracts that are always available to the players. Any one of the players at the table can fulfill these on their turn. These contracts have a number of different types of resources that they require on them. And they give you a reward of both prestige and possibly maybe some batteries or some credits for fulfilling them. Now the trick here is when you fulfill these, they have to all come from one very specific row. You can't fulfill them from all your tableau that you have on your player board.
Right, and that's going to be something that you potentially do at the end of your turn.
Yeah. Now there's also contracts here that you can actually acquire in secret too. Now you'll be able to do that from one of your particular divers that you can acquire. This is the main board, and the main board will hold these contracts to also have a market, which you can use one of your divers to manipulate to either sell off resources that are blocking spots or to buy resources that you need for very particular spots. You have your prestige track. Again, this is going to track your victory points through the course of the game. And on the far left, you have your sponsors and the rewards that they could possibly get.
Yeah, the sponsors are going to come into play, as does just about everything on every given turn. It all sounds like a lot of complicated moving parts, and to some degree it is, but the turn structure and what you're doing on your turn is actually quite simple when it comes down to it. We can talk about that.
Yeah, so on your turn, you're basically picking one of your 5 different slots and enacting that particular diver that is in that row with it. Now you'll notice some of your divers are not going to be able to do anything. However, let's talk first about taking an action. On your turn, again, you get to pick one of these slots, and you simply pick whichever diver you wish to use, and you move one of those over. Now, it doesn't have to be the 1 slot. It could be the 5 slot, the 3 slot. You can do these in any order that you wish, and you get to enact one particular key. When you enact that key, you then look at that number, and you look at the sponsor over there, and you get the option of doing whatever it says.
Exactly, and these sponsor abilities have a variety of different things. Some as simple as getting a credit, getting a battery, and then there's some that allow you to take the diver action that you're going to use that turn twice.
Yep.
You can upgrade your divers, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. And then there's another one that lets you take some of your key tokens that you've used and bring them back up prematurely.
Right. So again, coming back to this, I use the 1 diver. When I use the 1 diver, I then look over to the sponsor track at the one that's in the number 1 position. This one requires me to use credits, in this case 2 credits. He allows me to upgrade any single diver that I wish to do, either the one I'm using right then or a different one.
Right.
And when you upgrade a diver, you simply take that tile and you flip it over to its other side. All these divers have better abilities on the opposite side of them.
Yeah, so this is basically what you're going to be doing on your turn. Sliding a key token over, potentially using the sponsor if you can, if you have money in some cases, some of them are free, then using the diver ability. Yep. One of the things that Jeremy mentioned, the first thing you do is slide this token over. After you've used the sponsor, used the diver, that token is going to get flipped upside down and brought down to the bottom of your board, like I said, along this hacker track. You're going to put it in the leftmost space, and they're going to continue to go over until they touch the hacker track. So now you don't have a key token in a slot, so you're not going to be able to use that slot, or that level, if you will, until you've refreshed or at least brought that token back up. However, everyone has an X token. You can use the X token on any slot, whether or not there's a token there or not.
Yeah.
So I could use the X token on a future turn on a slot that I've used, use a diver again. The X token also goes down here. But the interesting thing that happens when you use the X token is that the sponsor order gets rearranged.
Yeah.
So as soon as you use an X token, you're going to take the bottom sponsor token, bring it to the top, move them all down, and reorder even the sponsor token. So as you can tell, there are a lot of things that move around, get reordered, so it's very difficult in this game to sort of plan something in advance.
Right, so also that X token is the slot that you use it in. So if you use an X and a 5, that acts as a 5,
right.
meaning that it's going to trigger the 5 sponsor. Now, what do all of these different divers do? There's one basic type that are the 4 different types of resources. So looking back at my board here, I activated the green diver. I push them all the way over, and this gives me a green cube in that very specific row that I go to. The other cool thing that happens here is the diver is now expended. He has to come up for air because he uses his oxygen tank at that point. I have the option here of using a battery to keep him in that position, or I can let him surface if I so wish. When he surfaces, he comes all the way to the top and he comes back down, and this slot will slide back down. You also have the option of using a battery to rearrange divers before you take the action. This allows you to kind of manipulate the board to be able to use an action you couldn't think you could use in a slot because it may have been empty, and now put them open in the slot that can be used.
Yeah, these are the things, this is where the programming of the game comes in, where you're manipulating the order of these divers, kind of taking a look at what you need and how far it is up and where you need it, and then potentially using a battery in just the right time to bring that right where you need it to get a resource on that bottom row to fulfill a contract.
Right. On a future turn, say I wanted to use my 2 diver, and I had all the different resources at the end of the turn to fulfill a contract, I'm then allowed to fulfill a contract that's available either in the contract row or something I've collected from my hand. We'll get into what kind of diver allows you to do that. When you do that, you collect victory points, you move your prestige token, and then again, it may give you some kind of additional batteries or credits. Some of the other divers, what do they do?
In addition to the divers that collect all of the 4 basic resources, there's 4 other ones, and we'll go over those really briefly. One of the other divers is the engineer, and what she allows you to do is upgrade your technicians. So you can use her to either slide your mechanic down 1 or slide your hacker over 1. Again, these are effectively going to make them more powerful, so when you use the battery to either move your diver up and down, the technician is going to allow you to move more spaces with that diver. The hacker is basically going to shorten your cycle in the game so that you can refresh your key tokens.
Yeah, speaking about the engineer too, she does cost $1 in order to use her. However, her flipped upgraded side costs nothing.
Exactly.
So that's why you want to be able to upgrade your different divers through the course of the game. There's several different ones in here. One of them allows you to actually collect the rewards. This is a very unique, he's a robot, so to speak.
Right.
And when he's used, he allows you to use the position, again, the sponsor, but to collect a reward in one of these areas. The rewards vary from collecting batteries, collecting victory points,
extra
upgrading
cards.
divers. Yeah.
And all of those are immediate effects. And the other cool thing is you take that reward token, you're going to flip it upside down, and on the back is either a victory point or 2 credits. You're going to put that over in this reward spot next to the different levels on the board. From that point on, when you complete a contract on that particular level, you'll also get that reward again.
Yeah. What other divers? One of the divers is really cool. He allows you to go through the deck, draw 4 cards, and then pick a contract that you hide from other players that you can fulfill. He also allows you to copy another player to your left or right.
He's the spy, so whatever level he's on, you can look over to the player on your right or left and look at that same level and use a different diver's ability as though it was on your board. And finally, the last diver is the trader. The trader allows you to go to the store, and like Jeremy said earlier, you can buy or sell resources from the store or sell them to the store from the slot that you're using that on.
Yeah, one of the very cool things I want to talk to you about the spy is there is a variant for the spy. Now this game mostly is a very solo style of game.
Yeah.
However, the spy has 2 different ways you can play him. Either the non-aggressive or the aggressive side. The non-aggressive side is you just copy that player's thing and you pay $1 to the bank in order to be able to copy it. The aggressive side is you pay that dollar to the player, but it forces that player's diver to come up.
Yeah, the diver has to surface. Now, that player has the ability to use a battery if they have them to avoid the resurface, but if they don't have it, you're bringing that diver up to the surface, which makes that diver a much nastier element to the game for sure.
So you just keep going around the table with each player taking one action using one of their keys to enact one of their divers until one player fulfills enough contracts to get 18 prestige points. Once that happens, you finish out the round. The player with the most points wins.
Yep, that's it. So,
review.
What do you think?
Yeah, well, it's a programming game, which typically isn't my style of game. I'm a worker placement guy. That's the type of games I like. Programming kind of drives me a little bit batty at times. I don't know why. This one takes longer than an hour, though. I mean, we played this, and it took about an hour and a half, and I don't even think we finished our first game that we played.
No, yeah, I think that an hour is pretty generous, or the opposite of generous in terms of time. This is going to take more time than an hour, I think. Unless you've played this many, many times and you're really into the flow of it. But the puzzly aspect of the programming, and this programming, it's not like programming from a traditional programming, what you might consider as a programming game. But there's a lot of manipulation of these little pieces to keep things ordered, and they keep moving down this sort of conveyor belt, if you will, and it hurts your head. Like, there's a lot to consider.
Yeah.
Not only is the stuff on your player board moving, but the sponsor thing is moving. So there's a lot of intricate things that you're trying to orchestrate, and all of a sudden you realize that you've forgotten that one aspect that moved, and now it completely changes things. So that could slow the game down, I think, a little bit, is what you're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want to confuse this for saying that it's a bad game or it's poorly designed. This is definitely not a hard game to play. It's not it's not a difficult game to understand or to learn. The problems are the difficulty comes in trying to get very specific resources into very specific rows and then use very specific things to fill contracts at the right time, because you could be building up to something and then have it taken right out from under you, and then you have to restart this whole chain of resources, and it becomes a tedious project over time.
And that's what can slow it down a little, because if you've filled one of your bottom rows or lower rows with a lot of resources for a very specific goal, and then someone does that, then you're going to have to go to the store. You're going to have to trade some of those out. You're going to have to, basically, it's very tactical. You're going to have to adjust your plans to whatever's going on. And those plans have a lot of moving parts. Yeah. So it's a lot of things that you then have to do. You can't just set up another action for your next turn and go, okay, well, I'll just do this instead. You kind of have to put in a little bit more effort. And then on top of that, someone might foil that. So
Yeah.
you got to keep an eye on what the resources people are picking up. From appearances, it looks like a somewhat simple game to play. I figured it was going to be puzzly in the way you're working this. I didn't imagine it was going to be as puzzly feeling as it is. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. I think people who love real brain burnery sort of like, okay, I'm going to do this part to move this part, and okay, I think I've got it all. They're going to like this game a lot. But it can be a little much for some people, I think.
Yeah.
And I think maybe even a little much for my taste in terms of puzzly. I like puzzly games, but this thing has a lot of moving parts for sure.
It is a very slow burn, too, when you think about it. Some of these contracts require you to have 2 or even 3 of the same type of resource. When you think about that, say this card had 3 black on it. That means that you have to start building in this row, but the black's only going to circulate very slowly. It's going to be, you'll use it here, put a resource in, it goes all the way back up the top, meaning you're going to have to take several turns, refill those keys back in, or use a vast amount of batteries in order to push those divers down. So it does take a while to build up to be able to fulfill these contracts, which means to get 18 prestige points, it just takes a longer time than 60 minutes is what we experienced.
Yeah, 18. We were probably 3/4 of the way there and looked up again to remind ourselves that it was 18 points, and 18 sounded like a lot even then. I think one thing we didn't do in our plays is we didn't utilize the store too much.
Right.
I would think that this, depending on what players use in this game, it might change things a little bit, because we didn't really go to the store too much, and there could be some mechanisms there that would help speed things along. Maybe we were biting off a little bit more than we can chew on the contracts. We're the kind of guys, those big juicy contracts come out with big points and some big, list of resources you need. They're very attractive, but it's a challenge in this game for sure.
It's a beautiful looking game, though.
It is a gorgeous looking game, and I must say we totally glossed over this when we were talking about the components. They are die cut. They're even die cut on the bottom here. These things slide up and down.
Yeah.
The artwork is beautiful.
Yeah.
I would say, and I've heard this in one other review, so I'll caveat this, and I agree with it. The game, from appearances, from an artwork standpoint, I actually kind of expected, not knowing anything about the gameplay, I expected a different sort of game. It seems like this theme has so much rich detail and backstory that it seems interesting that it's used on kind of a programming puzzle game with not much narrative really at all.
Yeah.
But it's a gorgeous looking game.
Absolutely. Again, this is OTYS, 2 to 4 players. It says it takes 60 minutes. Don't think so. Ages 14 and up. If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, everything else that we do here at Man vs. Meeple. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Season 2 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored in part by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.